I know the ones at the door and before. It's time to talk about vaporwave.
Wow. Yeah.
No genre on the internet, among the many, have as much as a complex history or mythology as vaporwave, even existing in such a short time, originating from the term vaporware for software that doesn't exist. Combining it with wave, which came from the wave genres from the 80s, particularly new wave, cold wave, and dark wave. Vaporwave refers to a vibe in a genre that does not exist. It has a long, complex history that I can't be fucked to get into, but I will recount as paraphrasing and general spouting. In 2009, Sunset Corp released Nobody Here, a video of an old recording or modern recording with a filter of a rainbow path leading nowhere while a repeated sample saying, The tone of the song is a mixture of nostalgia, emptiness, and loneliness. The artist responsible, also responsible for Echo Jams, another vaporwave classic, is also one of Trix Point Never, a highly famous and prominent vaporwave artist that I have not listened to. You may also know Floral Shop with this song. Delicious and nutritious and the breathing in air. The genre was born off of copywritten samples designed to evoke that sense of old nostalgia and wonder. That sense of familiarity of a memory you don't have and how it leaves you lonely, expanding to lots of other subgenres that allude to that sense of missing time and liminality. We see images of the past, we see their emptiness, and the soundtrack is slowed down and tired because of it. To the decaying tape loops of William Basinski, Infinity Frequencies and The Caretaker, the allusions to death in Dark Nature and Begotten, the nostalgic Malcorp in Hallmark 87 or Dark Ambient Towers, even the traditional Vaporwave and Eternal Judge, and even weird adjacent noise like 1-800-PAIN. Clarify, I'm aware that not all these genres are technically Vaporwave. I'm going to get into that later, but it's mainly how influential the genre has been with nostalgia and liminality and how much it appears everywhere now, and I think all these genres have enough in common with Vaporwave that they're not just exclusively for no reason. A lot of dark ambient has a lot in common with Vaporwave, which is why a lot of those albums were dark ambient. I'll be going into more detail on this later, so I'm not wasting your time. Well, I am. Did you get all that? Hope not, because we're leaving that. Recently, in Vaporwave circles, a newer, flashier version of Vaporwave music has come out and it has caused discourse. We must now discuss it for the next 2 or 5 years. The style of Vaporwave is called Barber beats, composed of simpler, shorter beats that are usually composed of bass samples and slowed down. Sort of. It's obviously a bit more complex than that, but I'll address all that. This style of Vaporwave defines the shiny and artsy album cover on top of lazy sampling, which has led to some controversy since these albums don't tend to credit their samples and are mostly made for direct uploads on YouTube or Bandcamp. They're called Barber beats because of this. Haircuts for Men is the major artist most people know of. I only recently learned of their prominence in this subgenre through Pad Chennington, which highlighted one Barber beats artist I did know about. Oblique Occasion. Not that significant, I only put them on my best list. Whoops, guess I posted cringe. If you can't tell by my sarcasm, I'm not particularly empathetic to these detractors, which I'll get into. Before that, let me be fair and say they have some good points. The main criticism of Barber beats is that they're unethical and lazy. This is because some of the creators of Barber beats, allegedly, tend to mostly hash out lazy samples of slowed down crap, with obvious samples which they don't credit. There's also the complaint that these albums are all pure presentation with beautiful, symbolic album covers, but not much beneath the shield. You end up listening to a vibe more than an artistic expression. As somebody who is not great at crediting, I do understand this complaint, and it is justified. Especially if you're a pro artist, which I'm trying to be better at. The album should absolutely credit the work they sample, as should mainline Vaporwave, that apparently does not do this. More on this later, but the other complaint is that because of the attention and possibly for profit, it has resulted in Barber beats being kind of bad, which means a lot of bad music, quote-unquote, ruining Vaporwave. If you can't tell by that latter complaint, this is not unique to Vaporwave. Despite that, I do get that this more accessible version of a prior niche genre is frustrating, a unique and small genre with locals suddenly inundated with intruders who don't understand the culture, parading around the icons for social gain or profit. I understand. I even watched it happen as an outsider. I watched a video years ago about how funk turned to drift funk, how modern funk is all drift funk, ruined the genre completely from the original vibes, dark ambient, dark wave branch. It's a little more complicated than that, but the idea that the genre is changing away from its roots is still a little present in it. This is also what happened to dubstep after Skrillex added an element of rave and heavy metal to it. This is also what happened when punk rock became British with the Sex Pistols. I get the gripe. Now, let's actually think this straight. Vaporwave, a genre known for mixing and mashing copyrighted samples in order to ignite that sense of nostalgia and emptiness over liminal and nebulous memories, which primarily relies on existing known samples, is a genre about that. Barber beats, realistically, does not change that. The people talking about Vaporwave as if it is this ethical genre is horseshit. Vaporwave was built on copyright. It was built on using samples that invoke nostalgia. That isn't to say that there isn't any type of copyright infringement going on, which I'm going to address later in the video, but to go back to when I brought up all those other artists and genres, Barber Beats being singled out for being the one that uses lazy sampling, I kind of have to ask what that really means. Like, I was really upset in 2023 when a bunch of artists were doing that lazy sampling, and it is lazy, they're using it for nostalgia, but if it's an obscure sample and it's distorted, you don't recognize it, how is that lazy? If you do recognize immediately, then it is lazy and the artist needs to try harder, but that has to do with the quality of the music, not really the ethics of it, and I feel like this discussion about quality shouldn't be muddled in with the discussion of copyright, because that has to do with all of Vaporwave. Or if the music just sucks, oh no, bad music, run! What exactly is the goal of the song? There are plenty of songs by mainstream Vaporwave artists that do exactly this. Now, I'm not saying artists should not credit their work, they should, but in terms of sampling and legalities, that's a harder line to cross because, well, that's a process. Sampling is expensive, or at least it can be, and while I don't think it's as simple as samples, not being credited. Alright, again, I'll get into this later, but what I'm trying to say is a genre built off of using copywritten symbols is probably not the best one to judge whether it's ethically consuming copywritten samples. Like, that's the point of the genre. If it wasn't doing that, it wouldn't be doing the one thing it's doing, which is invoking a strange nostalgia. There's also a case with whether the obscurity is part of the point. A lot of obscure, weird music tends to present itself as mysterious and silent. Perhaps maybe the reason a lot of these aren't sampling automatically, including old Vaporwave, is just to keep up that mystique. I do think the discussion is worth having, for the record. It's more that I feel like a lot of the situation's a little less complicated than we're making it. I don't think Barber Beats is intentionally copyright infringement, but I also don't think that the discussion about the change in the genre and the quality shouldn't be had, but I also know when people are mostly just complaining about change. On another note, I do get that it is true artists should clear samples. There is a risk for smaller artists to be fucked over, since they aren't in the content ID system and won't be flagged, especially if they are obscure or from another country. I get that, especially if they want to make money off it. If you think that scrutiny should be applied to Vaporwave, then fucking apply it to the caretaker who didn't cite a single sample, and I didn't even know if they cleared a sample because they're all old records, some probably in the public domain. Does that mean they should be exempt even if they are public domain? Provided they are, which they might be. The first fucking Caretaker album is a borderline Barber Beats album for the first few songs. They are slowed down ballroom tunes to evoke a haunted ballroom. That's the point. Chennington also pointed out how the Content ID system works, but that's a bit generous. It works for larger pop artists, but not much for independent artists or even artists that deliberately don't use Content ID. On another note, this scrutiny should probably be applied to the copyright system for not catching smaller artists if you do have that critique, because it is unfair. Making videos on small artists, they almost never catch you. There is a risk for obscure artists to have their work stolen, and those instances should be called out. I don't know much about Vaporwave, but it was never a money-making genre, even at its peak. I do understand that corporations have since adopted the vibe and style of Vaporwave, but the music itself they've struggled to. I'm not saying the genre's not corporate, but I feel like the people trying to compare that to Barber Beats are pushing it. I can't imagine these attention seekers want anything more than a niche fan base. If they want money, they'd be better off making royalty-free jazz. Let's address the argument that the genre has gotten worse because of the growing accessibility. I'm mostly mixed on myself, but being somebody who mostly observed the genre from the outside, let me put it like this. Albums like Floral Shop and Echo Jams have a unique internet-tied legacy. The internet, for the longest time, was niche and small. To a certain degree, I had access to it when I was 6, but it technically was. The early 2010s internet was the same. In 2016, in fact, meme culture and vaporwave were just beginning to sprout out with an initial backlash as pretentious trash. Before nostalgia became the main tone of the internet, it was kind of a cringy, ironic genre. Until the years passed and suddenly this niche little space was no longer that. It had grown for years and now most people knew what vaporwave was. Vaporwave hit this bloom around 2020 during the pandemic as a bunch of dark ambient vaporwave and markcore albums hit the spotlight. And now it wasn't niche and special, which could be applied to the internet as a whole too. In the same sense, Barber beats are the evolution of vaporwave, the early proto-genre where it was developing, the high point of the golden age, the later golden age where it came to maturity, ironic enjoyment to serious admiration, and corporate mainstreaming. Most genres have this to some level unless they're weird genres like extreme metal or Teletubbies. Now, vaporwave is no longer niche and quirky. Most people know what it is and the new kids are making what they can out of it. Is it lazy? Is it ruining the genre? That's mostly subjective, but I would argue no. We can also see that the genre has definitely had the time to spread out into other branches like mallcore and I hate this. It's had the time to be able to spread into a lot of different branches and ideas because liminality and nostalgia are malleable ideas. I write for a living, and I think to a point it was eventually just going to end up petering into, dissections like this. And I don't think it's fair to say that all vaporwave is dying because Barber beats kinda sucks sometimes. There's a lot of different kinds of vaporwave and you can find all sorts of it. In my sphere, there's dark ambient, which is in my opinion one of the best genres ever and is chock filled with music that uses the tropes of vaporwave. And even as I mentioned earlier, hyperpop takes a lot of inspiration from it. My favorite is 1-800-PAIN. But you can find a lot of the same tropes vaporwave uses in hyperpop. Any genre experiencing growth is going to have growing pains, especially if it is accessible to profit or social credit. If there is lazy hashing out in the genre different from any other genre, show me. All of that said, I don't think this should be about that. This change in genre shouldn't only be about that. And I appreciate that other corners of the internet have grown to reevaluate copyright infringement and piracy for what it means for us versus the corporations. Even ignoring that people who share these beliefs are vaguely fringe. I'm not going to stand completely on the pro-piracy side. I get why it's illegal and why people don't want to steal.
Tort websites, video games free.
How to steal things that don't belong to me.
But you may not. The internet has exposed people to what copyright infringement looks like, but more to the company. Even the 2000s had the scandal regarding musical piracy, which is on the rise, but not for reasons you may think. There's also the truth that in some countries people can't afford luxuries like video games and music streaming because money isn't equal across the world. Different countries have different incomes for their dollar, and what a price of bread could mean in one country could mean something completely different in another. And the thing is about piracy is that they never go after the people selling the pirated product, they go after the people buying it, which is the problem. Because pirating a product and putting it out is legal if you got it legitimately, and if you buy it thinking it's legitimate, it's legal. But the thing is, purchasing a product that was allegedly pirated isn't technically illegal if you don't know it was pirated. And even then, again, it should be for the people pirating, not the people purchasing. Because the people pirating are going to keep doing it if their customers go away, because they can just get a new customer base. And if they're in another country, there's probably a much bigger reason why they're doing it than just, stealing. People don't steal things because they want to, or most cases they don't.
One time I made a shut up.
And lastly, music streaming and music purchasing is a luxury, and it's a luxury only the affluent can afford. I used to buy vinyls of my favorite albums until it got too expensive, and the same goes for CDs, and now I don't really buy anything except digitally, so if all my computers get fried and nuked, then I guess I'm fucked. I've made it no secret on this channel that, to some degree, companies control music and cash flow like black holes. When we talk about Barber beats and vaporwave, we tend to forget that the culture that creates this genre isn't only nostalgia, it's copyright. It's symbols and corporate motifs. The slower tempo and thick reverb is an asset of music playing in a mall or store. The symbols come from video games or VHS iconography. It's about invoking nostalgia for the user, which leads into a depressing tone of old memories and lost joy. I'm not saying these Barber beat type albums don't commit copyright infringement for the original artists, and there is a risk for smaller artists that are lesser known. We can blame the infringer, or we can blame the system that allows for smaller artists to be muted, which promotes only people from the most prominent bubbles and allows them to profit off those with less. There's also a truth that derivative or stolen art is still art. I don't know enough about Oblique Occasions, but I do know that I love that album enough to slide it onto my best list. If it turns out that album is all stolen valor, I guess my positive feeling was wrong and so was I. That sucks. However, who were the artists they got it from? Why were they obscure and why can't I find them? And if Oblique Occasions can get away with not crediting them, then what do we do about that? I'm less upset that Barber Beats has the potential to be lazy garbage, and more upset that even in its current evolution, Vaporwave is not considered a serious genre. In some regards, neither is electronic. To be fair, every genre in media thinks they aren't taken seriously compared to somebody else. However, electric genres aren't seen as real because in a sense they're still new, not nearly as mythological as acoustic or symphonic music. And digital music like Vaporwave isn't nearly as seriously looked at like analog electronic music. I'm sure there is a copyright infringement scandal buried in hordes of Vaporwave, but I'm also sure this problem wouldn't exist if copyright was equal. Nobody here samples Lady in Red by Krista Bird. Most people probably don't know that because these are two completely different songs. Even then, the samples are a component of the song, an instrument aiding the intended tone. If those artists wanted to not pass those samples or sue to have them removed, they could. Even if there's a contract, they have massive labels behind them and use as estate. Look to the copyright precedents set by the Blurred Lines case, which was shaky at best, but it was about money. Yellowcard didn't sue Juice WRLD until his song became famous. They probably wouldn't have bothered if either of those songs were obscure. I could preach the artist first mentality all I want, but copyright only works for artists if they have the weight to defend it. The Harlan Ellison copyright infringement case is rare. So rare there aren't any high-profile cases that already favor the person who has more money. Copyright only really works if you have the money and time. It takes forever to prove, and the odds are never in your favor. Ever. All of this is to say a few things. If you worry about Barber Beats ruining Vaporwave for you, then before I get to that, I'm not saying piracy is the solution. I don't think copyright shouldn't exist, but I think there's also a case to be made that copyright doesn't really solve the problem because it wasn't designed with the internet in mind. The internet, things just spread too fast. It's hard to control. But in the same way someone can lose control of their own voice, someone else can have their voice stay to them forever because why people care about things is, I don't know, it's just not equal. All of this is to say a few things. If you worry about Barber Beats ruining Vaporwave for you, then it probably already did. If you want to support artists and want credit, good luck with that. Yes, samples should be cited, but also that should apply to all artists. And if somebody is just making albums for fun at most, provided they are honest, I don't think diligence will solve the problem with theft. Because the problem isn't that people do it, or even that people sometimes get away with it, it's that copyright isn't equal. Nor is accessibility. If some kid is making Vaporwave to get into mixing and album production because it's a venue to get into it, good. Hell, I think the art shows there is passion in the space to some degree. If a person is using it to scalp and make money, that happens in every genre, the best you can do, even if it is famous, is talk about it or ignore it. Or elevate things that, quote-unquote, deserve better. I should clarify that my respect for Vaporwave as a genre just kind of comes from the respect I have for all weird genres. And even though I'm not huge into it, I've also should be clear that my liking rate of Barber Beats is the same as normal Vaporwave, in that I like some of it and I don't like some of it, and most of it I'm not huge over, but it doesn't really matter what I think of the damn genre. Music piracy happens for a lot of reasons, as does copyright infringement, and there is a conversation to be had with how we treat smaller artists with little power. There's a conversation to be had with who gets access to making music, and who gets access to having music. However, for every the Jeej, beware of stolen sound effects packs, more often you see a Yellowcard Juice WRLD case, or even Universal Studios where the infringement or violation of it goes unnoticed or ignored. How often do we hear horror stories about label fucking artists out of their rights and values? After all, if you have the money to spend, a multi-million-dollar fine is just a slap on the wrist. This isn't to say Barber beats or Vaporwave don't have any controversy, but I also understand that the issue isn't small. Not everyone gets to just make music. A lot of people can't even start a band, get lessons, or even out of money just in general. Some people might be physically or socially disabled. There might even be cultural reasons. At the same time, there are people who are allowed to do whatever the hell they want. Take it as me being cynical, but I think Barber beats are not a sign of new life in Vaporwave or even its death. I think it represents its end, but not its death. After the great supernova Vaporwave, we are seeing the bright clouds fade and the white dwarf in the center settle down. We are seeing the genre leave its heights to enter an age of dormancy. It happens. Sometimes a genre that was once so excited and full of life just doesn't live up to what you dreamed of it. Maybe there really was nobody here.
Nobody